The millionaire flung a glass of Coke into a server's face in an upscale restaurant, purely for his amusement. He never imagined that moment would turn her into a city-wide symbol of dignity, or that it would mark the beginning of his own painful descent. Do you believe a single cruel act can change the destiny of two people? Read until the end to find out who truly wins. Kneel. The word wasn't loud, but it was enough to freeze the air around table 7. It was no joke. It was a command, issued amidst the soft piano music of the Crimson Room, a place where power and money were served alongside expensive wine. Lucas Grant sat at the head of the table, wearing a charcoal grey jacket, a dark soda stain marking his shirt collar. He glanced down at his cuff, curling his lip into a sneer, a cold smile, not of anger, but of contempt. Be careful, girl, Lucas said slowly, his voice flat and dry as metal. I don't like seeing servers tremble in front of me. Don't let me see you ruin my dinner again. Understood? Emily, a server who had only been working there for 3 days, could barely breathe. She kept her head bowed, her hand still shaking as she held the wet tray, stammering, I apologize, sir. Ethan Marlowe, sitting to Lucas's right, burst out laughing. The big man, sporting a flashy gold watch, tapped his hand lightly on the table. Apologize. Not enough. You should kneel and wipe that mess up with your own napkin. Show us how much you respect your customers. Jeering laughter echoed around the table. Emily stood frozen, her face pale, her eyes welled up with tears, but she desperately held onto the tray, not daring to move. From the bar, Kate had seen everything. She had worked here for over 5 years, long enough to know that the Crimson Room, though outwardly gleaming, was full of the dark shadows of arrogance. She placed her empty tray down and took a deep breath. The golden light reflected in her brown eyes, making them appear deeper and calmer. Then Kate stepped forward. The chatter at table 7 gradually died down as her footsteps approached, light but resolute. She stopped next to Emily, shielding the younger woman with her own body. Gentlemen, Kate said, her voice soft but authoritative. I apologize for the incident. I will clean the table and bring fresh drinks. But please stop mocking my colleague. Lucas raised his head, his smile thin as a razor cut. Oh, look who's lecturing us on ethics. Who do you think you are? He leaned back in his chair, his voice low and steady. You're just a server. I pay you to serve me, not to hear you talk about respect. If you don't like it, you can leave. Kate held his gaze steadily. You are right. I am a server, and I am proud of it. I simply want to ensure everyone is treated with kindness, and if that makes you uncomfortable, then perhaps the problem isn't with me. A spoon clinked against a wine glass. The air in the room thickened. Lucas chuckled softly, but offered no reply. Ethan gritted his teeth, leaning towards Kate, his voice harsh. You think you're a hero around here? Power doesn't belong to the one carrying the tray. Understood, Kate responded, her voice small but firm. Power cannot make others small, unless you choose to see them that way. That statement silenced the table for a few seconds. Then Ethan jumped up. Then let me remind you of your place. He grabbed the full glass of Coca Cola, his eyes blazing with a mix of fury and embarrassment, and suddenly flung the ice-cold drink directly onto Kate's head. Everything froze. The piano music stopped abruptly. The subtle clinking of glasses somewhere only made the silence heavier. The dark liquid streamed down Kate's face, soaking her hair, her uniform, and dripping onto the wooden floor. Ice cubes scattered. She stood perfectly still. Lucas watched the scene, saying nothing. Only a slight frown, a fleeting moment of confusion that quickly vanished. Other staff members peered out from behind the counter, no one daring to step out. The restaurant manager, a middle-aged man in a suit, only managed to rush over after the incident was complete. He looked at Kate, his eyes a mix of panic and apprehension, then quickly glanced at Lucas, who remained seated casually, holding his wine glass. "Signor Grant, I am so sorry about this," he stammered. Lucas simply shrugged. "Indifferent. It's fine. As long as you people do your jobs correctly." That line was enough to silence the manager. Kate said nothing. She only slowly removed the soaking wet apron, using it to wipe the streaks of Coke from her face. That action made the entire room hold its breath. She wiped slowly, meticulously, as if washing away the humiliation with her own hands without blame. Without pleading, then she folded the apron neatly and placed it squarely on the table, right in front of Lucas. "You can buy everything here," Kate said, her voice strangely calm. "But you cannot buy respect." She turned to leave. The manager whispered, "Kate, wait." But she didn't stop. He fell silent. No one stopped her, and no one dared to look her in the eye as she walked through the lobby. On her way home, the night wind carried the scent of coke and exhaust fumes. Cold and stinging, a light rain began to fall as Kate opened the door to her small apartment. She took off her uniform, tossed it into the washing machine, and looked at herself in the mirror. Wet hair, pale skin, empty eyes. She didn't cry. She just stood there, looking at her face for a long time. "This job feeds me, but no one has the right to take away my dignity." She sat down on the old sofa, her feet still damp from the rain, her heart heavy. She didn't know that before she even had time to take off her shoes, someone in the restaurant had managed to record the entire scene. And just a few hours later, the whole city would know the name: Kate Reyes. If you were in Kate's shoes, what would you do? Kate turned her back and walked straight away from the dining table. She passed the bar, where several kitchen staff stood motionless, their eyes filled with fear. As Kate neared the door leading to the kitchen area, a trembling hand grasped her arm. It was Emily. "I'm so sorry." "Kate," the girl choked out. "I'm sorry I caused this. They humiliated you because of me." Kate paused. She didn't look down at her drenched uniform, but into Emily's frightened face, a face that reminded her of herself years ago. "It's not your fault," Kate said softly, her voice hoarse. "This is their fault. Go back to work. And remember, never let anyone make you feel small." Kate gently removed Emily's hand, then walked straight out. She knew she had crossed a boundary at the Crimson Room, from which there was no return. The locker room was silent. She used tissues to blot her coke-soaked hair, then changed into a t-shirt and jeans. No one spoke. A few colleagues sneaked glances, but no one dared to offer a word. That silence was worse than pity. She left the restaurant without reporting or offering any explanation. Outside, the rain fell softly, her footsteps steady on the wet pavement. Kate's small apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building. She opened the door, leaving the lights off. The smell of coke still clung to her, sticky and suffocating. She removed her uniform, threw it into the washing machine, and stood before the mirror. The yellow light reflected her face, tired, pale, but not defeated. She whispered, as if clinging to the last shred of self-respect, "This job feeds me, but no one has the right to take away my dignity." 3 days passed. She didn't go back to the restaurant. No one called her. Except Emily, the girl, only sent a short message. "They said you were fired. I'm sorry." Kate managed a sad smile. She had expected it. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, while walking past a coffee shop down the street, she overheard 2 customers whispering, "That video of the waitress getting coke dumped on her. It's really gone viral. It breaks your heart." She stood still like a statue, so strong. Kate was startled. Her heart hammered. She quickly opened her phone and searched. And just as they said, the clip, posted by an anonymous customer, was only 40 seconds long, capturing the entire moment. The title, When Dignity is Tested, the story at the Crimson Room. In the video, she saw herself, her calm face, amidst the mocking laughter, her eyes tearless. The comment section was packed. She is so strong. No one deserves to be treated like that. Who is that man? At the same time, many accounts began to trace the identities of Lucas Grant and his group. His name appeared on small news sites, then spread to larger media channels. An incident that was supposed to be just a restaurant accident had now become an upper-class scandal. Kate sat silently in her cramped room, staring at the bright screen. She wasn't happy, nor was she gloating. She only felt a heaviness in her heart. Her private humiliation had now turned into a public judgment. On the evening of the fourth day, Kate opened her old laptop. She had read hundreds of comments, some supportive, some hostile. She probably tried to cause trouble to become famous. Women these days, all it takes is a few drops of soda for them to cry for pity. She took a deep breath. She knew, if she remained silent, they would define the story for her. So, she wrote, "My name is Kate Reyes. I am a server, and I work hard. 3 days ago, I was publicly humiliated while defending my colleague. I didn't stand up to fight anyone. I just refused to remain silent." She wrote about the workers in the service industry, those who have to smile even when insulted, who must endure for fear of losing their jobs. "I'm not asking for pity. I only want everyone to understand. Respect cannot be bought, but it can be given with kindness." When she pressed post, she didn't expect anything. But in just one night, the post was shared thousands of times, not because of the tragedy, but because of her calmness and honesty. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in his vast penthouse, Lucas Grant was struggling with himself. The press had surrounded him. Every news site mentioned him. Young businessman, criticized for insulting service worker. Grant Holdings lost 12% of its stock value in just 48 hours. The phone rang incessantly. Partners cancelled meetings, and brands cut contracts. Worst of all was the call from his father, the founder of Grant Holdings, whose voice was cold as ice. "You have disgraced the Grant name. Don't call me until you sort out this mess." Lucas threw the phone onto the table. Leaning back in his chair, he opened his computer and typed the name, Kate Reyes, into the search bar. Her post appeared first. He read every line, his gaze slowly softening. There was no hatred, no insults. Only the truth told in a calm voice. For the first time in years, he didn't know what he was feeling: shame, confusion, or fear. He remembered her eyes when she left the table that day, eyes that held no anger, only recognition. He wanted to reach out, but didn't dare. Not because he feared rejection, but because he didn't know what he should say. 5 days later, Lucas was forced to appear before the media to explain. The short interview lasted 10 minutes, but every question was a stab. "Do you intend to publicly apologize to the server? Do you believe that action was an insult to human dignity?" Lucas answered briefly, "I am trying to fix the consequences." After the interview, as he returned to his car, he opened his phone and looked at Kate's post once more. The latest comment under the post read, "It's not outrage that makes people remember her, but her self-respect." Lucas read the sentence 3 times. Then he opened his contacts, hesitated, and typed a short message from an anonymous account. "I want to meet you only to apologize, not to justify. If you agree, I will wait wherever you choose." Kate read the message late that night. The phone's light reflected in her eyes, half anger, half curiosity. She didn't reply immediately. She put the phone down. Looking out the window, the rain was falling. Quiet and persistent, she knew that meeting, if it happened, wouldn't just be between a server and a billionaire. It would be a confrontation between dignity and power, between silence and the spoken word. Kate stared at the message from the anonymous account on her phone screen. She didn't need to guess. It was Lucas Grant. 3 days after her post. Things had escalated to the point where he couldn't hide anymore. And now, he wanted to meet her. She didn't know if it was a genuine apology or just a move to control public opinion. But deep down, a part of her wanted to hear him speak. Not to forgive, but to understand why people could use power to hurt others and still believe they were right. Fine. This Friday, the corner coffee shop, 10 a.m. You'll pay for my coffee. That morning, the New York sky was cold and grey. Kate arrived exactly on time, choosing a table near the window. The dim light shone on her high ponytail. She wore a simple leather jacket, looking stronger than she felt inside. Lucas arrived a few minutes later. He was still the man in the impeccably pressed shirt, but today he lacked the aura of confidence. He took off his sunglasses, revealing dark circles under his eyes, a sign of many sleepless nights. He stood there, briefly awkward, then gently pulled out a chair. "Thank you for coming. Speak," Kate replied, her voice composed, as if they were discussing business. Lucas took a breath. "You suffered an insult that no one deserves. I want to make amends, in a reasonable way." He opened his briefcase, pulled out an envelope, and spoke slowly. "This is compensation. Additionally, I can offer you a position as an image consultant for the restaurant chain in my holdings. It's a high-paying position, with a good environment. I think you deserve it." Kate was silent for a few seconds. Then she took a sip of coffee, her eyes fixed on him. "Do you know the strangest thing about this offer?" she asked. "It's that you still think everything can be solved with money." Lucas paused slightly. "That's not it. I just want to—" "You want to restore your image? I understand." Kate's voice was cold, but not sharp. "You were criticized by the public. Your father is disappointed, and your stock is down. Now you need a forgiving victim to make everything return to order. I assume that's me?" Lucas pressed his lips together. He couldn't say anything. He was used to controlling situations, but she, the woman who once served his table, made him unable to use logic or money to persuade her. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. Kate stood up. "It's not about what I want, but what I no longer want from you." She grabbed her bag and walked out of the shop, but stopped at the door. She turned back to look at him. The morning light shone on her face, making her eyes shimmer, but not with tears. "I don't want to hate you, Lucas, but I can't forgive you." With that, she turned and left. Her steps were slow but decisive. Lucas remained seated, looking at the cup of coffee, still steaming, the only cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He left the shop a few minutes after her, but by the time he stepped onto the sidewalk, she had disappeared into the crowd. The sound of the subway echoed in the distance, a long, metallic screech cutting through the cold wind. Lucas stopped, listening to the sound. And in that moment, a memory surfaced unannounced, uninvited. That metallic sound, it used to be there, too. Along with it was his mother's choked sobs, blending with the sound of the train passing by their old house near the Hudson River. Lucas was 10, standing behind a slightly ajar door, watching his father, the wealthy, powerful man, throw a glass of wine onto the floor. He yelled at his mother, "You're just a decoration in this house, nothing more." That small woman left in silence that night, taking only an old suitcase and a small photograph. Lucas had promised himself then that he would never be weak like her. He would be strong. He would never let anyone have the power to make him feel inferior. But standing on the street today, he realized he had become the very person he hated most, the one who used strength to humiliate the weak, to hide the fear of being hurt. He walked along the sidewalk, past ordinary shops, his gaze drifting. Everything around him, workers hurriedly eating breakfast, the cries of vendors, the sound of buses, felt alien, yet familiar. He saw his reflection in the window, not Lucas Grant, the successful young businessman, but an empty man, with eyes that knew fear. That afternoon, He called the only friend he still kept in touch with Max. An architect, living simply in the suburbs. "You were right," Lucas said when Max opened the door. "I forgot how to live like a human being." Max just silently poured coffee and placed the cup in front of him. "You haven't forgotten," he said. "You've just started remembering." Lucas looked out the window. The rain was still falling. In his mind, the image of Kate leaving the coffee shop was vivid, her eyes without hatred, only sadness and disappointment. It hurt him more than any criticism. "I don't want to hate you, but I can't forgive you." That sentence echoed repeatedly in his head, like an old song. And at that moment, Lucas knew his life had just stepped into a new chapter, no longer to save his reputation, but to redeem the part of himself he had lost. Lucas did not contact Kate immediately after the coffee shop meeting. She had said, "I don't want to hate you, but I can't forgive you." Those words haunted him for many nights. He temporarily halted all meetings, didn't go to the office, and didn't appear on social media. His vast penthouse became empty. No more phone calls. No assistants. Only him. Alone. With the crushing silence. 3 days. Then a week passed. Every morning, Lucas still brewed a cup of coffee out of habit, but couldn't bring himself to drink it. The coffee slowly cooled, and he realized the arrogance that was once his armor was now only suffocating him. One afternoon, he drove out to the suburbs, to Max's small wooden house. The rare friend he still kept in touch with, Max, an ordinary architect, living simply with a small garden, was the only person who dared to speak honestly to him. "She doesn't need my money." "Max," Lucas confessed, his voice hoarse. "She only wants respect. But I did the worst thing, just like my father did to my mother." Max poured him a glass of water. "Not wine." "Lucas, she already gave you the answer. If you genuinely want to atone, don't try to reclaim your image. Do something useful for people like her, people who have no power other than their hands and their dignity." That statement made Lucas silent for a long time. That evening, he started researching, not about Kate, but about the dry numbers in the service industry, minimum wage, working conditions, turnover rates due to stress. He realized thousands of people like Kate were still suffering in the silence that he had once contributed to creating. For the first time, Lucas no longer saw himself as the center, but as part of the problem. 2 days later, he drove his old SUV to the neighborhood where Kate lived, not to accidentally meet her, but to see if she was okay. He parked at the corner, near a small cafe and an old bookstore. Around 9 in the morning, Kate walked out of her apartment. She wore a white shirt, holding a thick folder, apparently scholarship applications. She walked quickly, but still paused to greet the gatekeeper. That composure made Lucas feel heavy-hearted. She was trying to remain calm during difficult times. A strong gust of wind swept through. The folder in Kate's hand burst open, papers scattering across the sidewalk. She bent down to pick them up. The papers getting wet in a small puddle. Lucas stepped out of the car, knieled beside her, and said nothing. He just silently picked up each sheet, gently smoothing out the edges. When he handed them back to her, he said softly, "Watch out for the wind. These things look important." Kate looked up, surprise mixed with wariness. "What are you doing here?" "Lucas, I just happened to be passing by," he replied, smiling slightly, offering no further justification. "Let me drive you. My car has heat. The papers will dry faster." She hesitated, but looked at her watch. She was almost late for her appointment at the university. She didn't want to rely on him, but she didn't have time to catch the train either. "Just this once," she said, her voice even and cold. In the car, they were silent. Only the gentle sound of the heater fan. A little later, Kate broke the silence. "I'm going to the university to submit scholarship applications. If I'm late, they'll close the list." And I'll have to wait another 6 months. Lucas nodded. I understand. I'll get you there on time. But when they arrived at the university gate, a group of students was protesting. The main entrance was blocked, and security wouldn't let cars through. Sorry, the council meeting has already started. The guard said. No one is allowed in without prior invitation. Kate looked at her watch. Only 2 minutes left. She clenched the folder, her voice catching. That's it. I won't be able to submit it for another 6 months. Lucas looked at the guard. Then around on the wall was a plaque with the dean's name. It took a deep breath, then spoke softly. Wait for me a moment. He stepped back and made a quick phone call. His voice was calm, polite, without the usual arrogance. Hello, this is Lucas Grant. I know today is the scholarship meeting. I don't want to interfere with the process, but I am here with an applicant. She arrived on time, but is stuck outside the gate. I respectfully request an extension of 5 minutes. I will take full responsibility for any inconvenience. I'm a monitor. The guard received a call from his superior. He gestured to Kate. You can go in. They agreed to wait 5 minutes. Kate was stunned. She looked at Lucas, but he only smiled. Go. Don't let your hard work go to waste just because the gate is closed. The meeting ended after nearly an hour. Kate walked out, her face radiant, but still maintaining her familiar composure. Thank you, she said, her voice sincere. Without you, I would have missed this opportunity. It was nothing, Lucas replied, his smile strangely kind. I just used power correctly for the first time in my life. They sat down together on a stone bench in the courtyard. The sky was turning to late afternoon, the sunlight filtering through the trees, casting shimmering patches on the ground. She told him about her years working 2 jobs at once, about her small apartment, about why she never stayed silent when she saw others being humiliated. He listened, truly listened. Then he spoke, slowly. My mother was publicly humiliated by my father. She never managed to hold her head up again. I thought that if I was strong enough, rich enough, I would never be hurt like her. But I used that very power to hurt others. His voice caught. The statement did not sound like PR. It was so genuine that Kate didn't know what to say. She looked at him and saw in his eyes no arrogance, but deep shame. I can't trust you immediately, she said softly, but I believe people can change if they truly want to. She pulled a piece of paper from her bag, quickly writing a line. If you are sincere, help me implement this. The paper was a proposal to establish a fund for improving working conditions, where the voices of service workers would be heard. Lucas looked at the paper, then nodded. I will start here. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and handed it to her. Write down everything you want to change in here. I won't edit it, won't delete anything. I will just learn from it. Kate took it, silently, and for the first time, she saw in Lucas's eyes not pity, but genuine respect. That afternoon, at the Grant Holdings office, Mark Donnelly, the interim CEO, was reading internal news. Lucas Grant spotted supporting former employee in charity project. Mark curled his lip. Excellent. Lucas, you are writing the script for my final act. He called the media department, his voice filled with mockery. Prepare a new campaign. The billionaire redeems himself with compassion. The grander, the better. When the public believes his image, the fall will be all the more painful. Mark hung up, turning his chair toward the glass door. The city below was brilliantly lit. In his eyes, that light was not hope, but the fire waiting to consume a man who had just learned how to do the right thing. That evening, Kate returned to her small apartment. The sky had turned purple. Streetlights filtered through the curtains, casting yellow streaks onto the walls. She sat still for a long time, still clutching the notebook Lucas had given her. In her mind, the conversation at the cafe replayed like a movie loop. A part of her wanted to believe Lucas was sincere. The other part warned, don't forget, He was the one who made you bow your head in shame. She opened her laptop and typed Lucas Grant's name. Articles, public profiles. Old photos appeared a man with a complacent smile. Speaking at galas and conferences. 2 hours passed, and she still hadn't found any evidence that his change was a PR stunt. The emptiness of the search results made her feel both relieved and wary. He might have been arrogant, but it seemed he wasn't a liar. Kate closed the laptop, leaning her head against the sofa. If this was an opportunity to change a system that had once hurt her, she would take it. But this time, she would do it her way. The next morning, just as Kate opened her door, Emily was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. The young girl looked awkward, clutching a cloth bag in both hands. "Are you really going back there?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "The Crimson Room was just the beginning. That man, Lucas Grant, humiliated you in front of everyone. Aren't you afraid?" Kate paused. A cold gust of wind swept through the hallway, lightly tossing her hair. "I haven't forgotten that." "Emily," she replied, her voice calm. "But if I don't go back, who will force them to change? The person who has been stepped on understands that feeling best. I'm not doing this to forgive him, but to reclaim my voice." Emily looked at her, her eyes filled with both worry and admiration. "Just remember," she said softly, "not everyone who says sorry is sincere." Kate smiled, lightly but sadly. "I know." The Grant Holdings building stood towering in the city center like a cold block of glass. Kate took a deep breath and walked through the grand lobby. Her footsteps were small, but steady. As she passed the reception desk, a man's voice called out behind her, "Good morning, Ms. Kate." She turned around. Mark Donnelly, the vice president, whom she had only briefly seen in a press conference last year, was approaching. He wore a charcoal suit, a pale red tie, his smile warm enough to conceal the coldness beneath. "Good morning, Mr. Donnelly," Kate replied, maintaining a professional demeanor. "Truly admirable," Mark said, his voice light as the wind. "Not many people dare to return to a place that once made them fall. Lucas is very lucky to have you." "Thank you. I'm here to be a consultant, not a spokesperson." "Oh, I understand." Mark narrowed his eyes. His voice suddenly lowered like a confidential whisper. "But you know, in this world, no one truly atones. They are just playing a new role." Kate looked straight at him. "If it's a role, I will be the one rewriting the script." Mark chuckled softly, patted her shoulder lightly, and walked away. That smile was soft as velvet but sharp as a knife. It left Kate with a chilling feeling, as if something was moving beneath his mask of kindness. The office designated for the fund for improving working conditions was on the 27th floor, simple but bright. Kate's desk faced the window, offering a view of the entire city. She placed the draft documents she had prepared last night on the table, ready for the first day. The door opened. Lucas walked in, looking tired but tidy. "I thought you wouldn't come," he said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Kate pushed the documents toward him. "I told you I don't give up, but I will monitor you, step by step. Prove that you are truly changing." Lucas looked at the documents, every line of her plan. Training programs, welfare improvement, roadmap, grievance mechanisms for employees, exprox. Everything was clear, meticulous, and realistic, to the point where he couldn't help but respect it. "I agree," he said. "Let's start today." In the following weeks, Kate and Lucas worked constantly. She realized he was genuinely trying. He no longer gave orders from above, but took the time to listen, ask questions, and accept counter-arguments from her. The initial hostility gave way to a different kind of silence, the silence of two people learning to trust. One morning, Kate accidentally spilled coffee on the table. She scrambled for napkins. "Wait," Lucas said, then went into the small kitchenette and brought out a roll of paper towels. But he stood still, looking at the towel as if it were a strange object. "I've never used this type," he confessed. Embarrassed. "I don't know how many sheets I should take." Kate burst out laughing, a genuine, rare laugh. "Use as much as you need. Millionaire. These are paper towels, not stock certificates." Luca bent down, wiping slowly, more meticulously than necessary. "I'm learning to pay attention to details," he said, half joking, half serious. Another afternoon. They sat together, analyzing survey data. "You only need to look at the totals," Waitress said, his eyes glued to the statistics. Kate shook her head. "No, it's these small details that matter. For example, the District 3 branch has the highest turnover rate because the coffee machine has been broken for 3 months. Lucas looked surprised, then chuckled softly. "I always talk about global strategy, but I forget that a single cup of coffee can change someone's mood for the entire day." He leaned down with her to check every number. "All right, teach me how to see through your eyes." She glanced at him. "Only if you genuinely want to learn." 3 weeks passed. Lucas had sold 2 luxurious properties, transferring the entire budget to the fund, an action that stunned the financial world. News sites began to change their tone. Billionaire Grant's journey of atonement, from pariah to humanitarian symbol. One evening, they watched the news report together on the office screen. Lucas sighed, half tired, half relieved. "We're heading in the right direction, aren't we?" Kate smiled. "Maybe. But remember, what they write isn't what's important. It's what you truly do." Just then, Mark Donnelly walked past the hallway. He stopped, looking at them through the glass partition. His smile was thin, pulled up at one corner of his mouth. No one in the room heard, but his lips moved. Almost a whisper. "No one truly atones, just another role." Then he turned away, leaving behind the strong scent of cologne and a cold feeling. Kate watched his shadow, a shiver running down her spine. The news report on the screen was still praising Lucas as an example, but in Kate's eyes, those words suddenly became fragile, as if a light gust of wind was enough to shatter them. After several weeks of serious work at Grant Holdings, Kate's initial caution slowly gave way to grudging respect. Lucas was different. He no longer spoke with a tone of command. Nor did he solve everything with money. He learned to listen, take notes, and accept her counter-arguments. But even so, Kate still noticed a simmering tension in him, the pressure of a man who had never stepped outside the world of numbers and reports. She understood. To know if he had truly changed, she had to take him out of his comfort zone. One late evening, when only the desk lamps were lit in the office, Kate placed a file on Lucas's desk. "I have a request," she said. Lucas looked up, his voice hoarse with fatigue. "Go ahead. I need you to participate in a practical project. No meetings or signings, but actual work. A community center is hosting a Repair and Connect Day this weekend. They need people to fix furniture and cook." Lucas frowned. "You mean manual labor?" "Exactly." Kate smiled. "No suit jacket. No conference room. If you can survive there, I will start believing that you truly understand the value of labor." Lucas looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Deal." On Saturday morning, he arrived at the community center in his old SUV. Dressed simply, he looked out of place among the volunteers in t-shirts and canvas pants. Kate was already there, her hair tied up, wearing work gloves, looking completely different from her usual image as a serious consultant. "Good morning, Millionaire," she teased, handing him a wrench. "Do you know how to use this?" "I watched a tutorial video on YouTube last night," Lucas replied, confident enough to be suspicious. Kate laughed. "Good. Then start with that long bench. It creaks like a warning sign." The morning passed amidst the sounds of sawing, hammering, and the smell of fresh paint. Lucas struggled with the old screws. sweat beading on his forehead. Kate brought him 2 glasses of cold lemonade, finding him frowning at a stubborn screw. "What's the problem?" she asked. "It won't follow the rules," Lucas replied, curt but amusing. "I turn it the right way, and it still strips." Kate sat down beside him, taking the tool. In the real world, not everything obeys. Sometimes you have to be gentler or find another way. Her hand lightly touched his, guiding him on how to tighten it. It was only a few brief seconds, but something unusually quiet settled in the air. Lucas subtly withdrew his hand, smiling sheepishly. "Thanks. I'm still learning how not to mess everything up." "You're making progress," Kate said, then stood up, her eyes showing a light trust. Throughout the morning, Lucas gradually integrated with the volunteer group. He helped a boy who spilled paint without a word of blame, even kneeling with him to clean the floor. Kate watched the scene, her heart softening. She didn't want to admit it, but this image was far removed from the man who had once thrown Coke at her head. At noon, they ate together in the yard. Kate talked about the nights she took the bus between 2 shifts, falling asleep in her seat, while Lucas shared memories of his childhood, living under the shadow of his powerful father, always having to prove he was strong enough not to be hurt. She spoke softly. "You know, at the Crimson Room, you were just a character, but here perhaps you are truly yourself." Lucas smiled, the first genuine smile he'd worn in months. "Maybe. And thank you for letting me be myself, even just for one day." As the sun began to set, the volunteers started packing up. Kate wiped her hands with a cloth towel. Lucas stood nearby, watching her. She smiled, her face smudged but brighter than ever. "You did well?" she said. Lucas replied, his voice light. "I just followed instructions." He was about to say something more, maybe a thank you, maybe something else, but the phone in his pocket vibrated. A familiar sound, short and sharp. He looked at the screen, the smile on his face freezing. "Excuse me, I need to take this." Lucas stepped back a few paces, away from the surrounding laughter and chatter. "What? Say that again?" His voice suddenly dropped. Kate, who was tidying up the tools, looked up and saw his expression change completely. "No way. Mark doesn't have that right," he nearly shouted into the phone. "Who authorized him? The board?" Kate put down the tool bin and approached him. Lucas hung up, stood still for a few seconds, then looked up. The gentle light he'd had in his eyes was gone. "What is it?" she asked. He inhaled deeply, his voice hoarse. "The board of directors just held an emergency meeting. They froze the entire budget for the fund for improving working conditions. And," he paused, a lump in his throat. "And what?" "And they officially requested that I step down from all executive positions for 3 months. They called it mandatory leave to stabilize the company." Mark Donnelly proposed it. The afternoon wind blew strongly across the yard, carrying a few leftover poster papers. Kate looked at him. The man who had just learned humility was now being pulled back into the vortex of power. She said softly, murmuring to herself, "Perhaps Mark doesn't believe in change. Or worse, he fears it." Lucas clenched the phone in his hand, his eyes distant. "I don't know who else I can trust anymore." "Kate." She stood still, offering no reply. Inside the center, the sound of children still echoed laughter, talking, the gentle tap of a hammer on wood, as if the world were continuing, while the two of them knew another storm was brewing. Lucas stood frozen in the community center yard. The board of directors had just officially announced the suspension of all his duties. Mark Donnelly had won. The wrench, stained with sawdust, slipped from his hand, clattering onto the cement floor, a dry, metallic sound echoing in the silent courtyard. The late afternoon sun swept across his face, revealing his empty eyes. devoid of the confidence of the man who once held the entire Grant Holdings empire in his grasp. Mark manipulated them, Lucas said, his voice strained, as if lost within his own body. They froze the entire fund. I was stripped of my executive power from the company I built. My whole life, I tried to prove I was stronger than my father. And now, I'm being kicked out like a helpless failure. Kate said nothing. She understood this collapse wasn't just about money. It was about his identity. The man who had once thrown Coke at her was now bowing his head, swallowed by the very system he had built. "Let's go," Kate said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We can't do anything here right now." On the drive home, the city lights came on. The light filtered through the car windows, flickering on their faces, two people who had just been stripped of the most precious thing, trust. Lucas's phone rang continuously. Then Kate's notification sounds bombarded them, non-stop. Lucas pulled the car to the side of the road and turned on his screen. A headline screamed, white text on a black background. "The perfect morality play. Lucas Grant and the waitress Kate collude to deceive the public." A series of secretly taken photos of them in the coffee shop, in the office, at the community center, all were spliced and fabricated into a story of a covert romance. The article asserted that the Fund for Improving Working Conditions was merely a cover for an image laundering campaign. Kate was called the actress playing the victim, the waitress who hit the jackpot. Lucas felt the blood drain from his face. "No, it can't be." He crumpled the article, his voice shaking. "We're under attack. He doesn't just want to take me down. He wants to bury you with me." Kate looked at her phone. Below the article were thousands of comments. She pretended to be insulted to gain fame. Poor Lucas. He must have been taken advantage of. Two pathetic people playing the saint. Kate's eyes darkened. The old humiliation rushed back, but this time, she didn't cry. "You might lose the company," she said, her voice calm but cold as steel. "But don't let me lose my honor." Lucas turned to her, seeing both fire and unshed tears in her eyes. "Kate, I swear, I knew nothing about this. I believe Mark could do that," she said. "But what frightens me is that a part of you still thinks PR can save everything." Lucas slammed his hand onto the steering wheel, his face contorted in despair. "No, not this time. I don't want PR. I just want to make things right." But Mark turned the truth into a weapon. Kate looked at him, silent for a few seconds, then sighed softly. "I believe what I saw at the center today. You are no longer the old man, but if you want to prove it, then stand up with honor, not with a reaction." Nighttime. The Grant Holdings building loomed in the darkness, tall and cold, like the fortress she once feared entering. "Take me there," Kate said, her voice decisive. "If they want to bury us with lies, I'll look them straight in the eye." They walked into the grand lobby, where all eyes turned toward them. No one spoke. The rumors had traveled faster than they had. The door to the executive office opened, a vast room with large glass windows overlooking the city at night. The brass nameplate engraved with Lucas Grant, chairman, still sat on the desk. Lucas walked over, placing his hand on it, his fingers trembling slightly. The cold metal reflected the face of a man who had just lost his entire world. He removed the nameplate, put it in a drawer, and sat down, staring blankly outside. "I used to think power made me stronger," he said, his voice hoarse. "I thought if I was rich, I would be respected. But it turns out, power is just a coat, and when you try to do the right thing, people tear it off to see how weak you are underneath." Kate quietly walked out of the small office kitchen, where she had just found an old mini toaster oven. She made 2 slices of toast. Spreading a thin layer of peanut butter, she brought the plate over, placing it in front of him. "Eat," she said softly. "They took away your title, your money, to your reputation, but they can't take away what you've learned. You don't need Grant Holdings to do the right thing." Lucas looked at the toast. I don't know where to start. Kate cut the toast in half, giving him one half, keeping the other for herself. Then start here, she said, her voice composed. Sharing. You once thought power was something you had to seize, but actually, it's something to be shared, just like a slice of bread. When you share your humanity, others will realize the person inside you still exists. Lucas looked at her for a long time. He held the half slice of bread in his hand, then smiled faintly, a small, tired, but genuine smile. Thank you. I thought I would starve amidst luxury banquets. Now, I understand. They sat in silence. Outside, the city lights reflected on the glass, like fragments of an old world dissolving. Lucas stood up, walked to Kate's desk, where she usually worked for the fund. He picked up the notebook she had filled with ideas about fairness and respect. I'm leaving, he said, his voice deep. But I'm taking this with me. Kate nodded. Not so you keep your promise to me, she said, but so you keep your promise to yourself. Lucas gave a slight nod, then left the room. The door closed. In his hands, he held only half a slice of toast and the old notebook, two small objects, but everything he could carry from the old world into his new journey. 6 months passed since the night Lucas left Grant Holdings. He disappeared from the city, taking Kate's half slice of bread and her notebook. No more suits. No, more lavish office. Yet the media still covered the story of the disgraced billionaire as an entertainment tragedy. Kate, though she had left Grant Holdings, still kept in touch with him. Their conversations became less frequent, but never ceased entirely. She couldn't deny the sincerity in his voice whenever he mentioned the fund or how he asked about the workers at the center. In the first few weeks, Lucas tried calling his old friends the partners he used to have dinner with, the ones who toasted him at parties. But now, every call ended with 2 cold words. Unfortunately not. I can't believe it, Lucas told Kate over the phone, his voice tinged with bitterness. The people who used to laugh with me, who called me the model of success, now treat me like a disease. Kate understood. She had lived that feeling. After being publicly humiliated, they weren't friends. Lucas, they were just people who liked the spotlight. You don't need them. You need action. She helped him start over. Kate introduced Lucas to several small community centers needing financial management. They worked at an old repair shop where the smell of wood and machine oil replaced the scent of office cologne. Lucas learned to use a wrench, learned how to brew black coffee. He was clumsy but patient. At noon, they ate cold sandwiches together on the workshop steps. Kate talked about working 2 shifts to pay tuition. Lucas talked about his childhood living under his powerful father's shadow, always having to prove he was strong enough not to be hurt. They didn't talk much, but every word was honest. Public opinion still hadn't forgiven them. The morality play, people still called it that. Many believed Lucas was only staging an act of redemption. Kate knew, if she remained silent, Mark Donnelly would continue to control the narrative. She decided to act. Kate reactivated the social media account that had once made her infamous. She began to write. Every sentence, every word, was like a declaration. He made a mistake, but he is changing with sweat and silence. I have seen it not in an office, but in a woodworking shop, in the way he bends down to help others without needing witnesses. She planned to post the article the following evening. It would be the greatest proof of her trust. When the clock struck 9 p.m., her phone vibrated. A strange message appeared. Miss Kate, I have something you need to see before you ruin everything. Regarding Lucas Grant's redemption arc. M.A.D. Kate paused. A part of her wanted to ignore it, but another part, the part still afraid of deception, urged her to know. She put on her jacket and walked outside. The cafe was located on a quiet street corner. Mark Donnelly was already waiting. his face composed as if he were just meeting an old friend. "Thank you for coming," he said, pulling out a chair. "I know you intend to post an article defending Lucas, but I think you should see this first." Mark pulled out a folder and several photos. The cafe's yellow light reflected on the metal table, making everything look chillingly credible. "I've been tracking him," Mark whispered, "and sadly, he's still the same person." Kate looked down. One photo showed Lucas shaking hands with a strange man in a luxurious office. Below it was a paper with the heading, "Image Sponsorship Contract, Lucas Grant." The bottom corner was cut off, showing only Lucas's signature. "He told me it was a community project," Mark added, his voice almost regretful. "But this email shows otherwise." He pushed several printouts toward her, spliced email excerpts discussing maintaining a positive image and leveraging the story with Kate to restore public trust. Finally, he opened his phone and played a short audio clip. Lucas's voice came through. Familiar, warm, and weighty. "I can't let this project collapse. I need to keep her around. Anyway, she's doing good work." Mark turned off the recording, looking directly at her. "See, he needs you for image benefits, not for truth. You trust him, but he never trusted you." Kate was silent for a long time. Her heart pounded, but her face went cold. She didn't know if she was more afraid or hurt. She picked up the paper. The signature was real. The photo was also real. She didn't know that Mark had cut off the bottom half the part, noting that the sponsored amount will be transferred directly to the community center. And that audio clip was only a fragment, missing the last few words. "She's doing good work and deserves to be trusted." But in that moment, all Kate saw was evidence of betrayal. She stood up. Her voice was deep but firm. "He used me to rebuild his image. The first time I was publicly humiliated. This time, I was humiliated privately. Thank you for making it clear." "Kate, don't rush," Mark said, trying to appear sympathetic. "No." She cut him off. "This time, I won't let anyone else write my story." She walked out of the cafe, the cold night air hitting her face. But she didn't cry. Back at her apartment, Kate sat silently at her desk. The computer screen was still open, the cursor blinking, waiting for her to press post. She opened the drawer and took out the notebook Lucas had given her. The first page still bore his writing, "Start over." If necessary, she flipped to the middle page, then closed the notebook, slowly placing it back in the drawer. That was the only action she took, not out of hatred, but out of a person folding up trust to protect her dignity. She opened her inbox and typed a short line. "You had your chance. You lied. I will no longer participate in your play." She hit send. Then she deleted all photos, planes, documents, and closed her social media account. When she turned off the machine, the room was left with only the faint yellow light of the desk lamp and the ticking of the clock. She sat still, looking at the closed drawer, the one holding the notebook that used to be a symbol of hope. Now, it was just evidence of something broken. On the other side of the city, Lucas was arranging tools in the workshop when his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen, seeing Kate's short message, reading the last sentence. His hand dropped the phone onto the cement floor. He called back, but the phone was off. He opened his computer. Kate's account was gone. All traces of her, the photos, the posts, had vanished, as if she had never existed. Lucas sat down on a chair, looking at the empty space in front of him, then said softly as a word to himself, "Mark 1, again." Outside the workshop, the night rain began to fall. Heavy drops fell onto the tin roof, mixing with the metallic sounds, exactly like the night long ago when everything began with a cold glass of Coke and a woman who refused to kneel. Lucas sat silently in the dark woodworking shop. The phone in his hand was still open. The screen paused on Kate's last message. "You had your chance. You lied, said. There were no more tears. The despair in him turned into a cold fury, the anger of a man with nothing left to lose but his honor. He knew, if he remained silent, Mark Donnelly would win. And then, not only would he be destroyed, but those who believed in justice would have no reason to stand up either. Lucas started doing something the old version of him would never do, seeking out the people Mark had once trampled. He called former employees, those who had been fired for not compromising, and former trainees of the fund, who didn't use money, but used his own story and Kate's to rekindle belief. Mark doesn't just want to ruin me, Lucas said in a small meeting at the community center. He wants to prove that workers people like you don't deserve respect. His eyes were no longer cold, but bright as a small flame in the damp room. Meanwhile, Kate had disappeared from the spotlight. She worked as a server in a small Brooklyn cafe, wearing a different name tag. Her hair shorter. She tried to forget Lucas, tried to believe he was just a sophisticated play by the rich, but whenever she heard the sound of wood clashing in the shop, she remembered the morning they fixed the bench together, Lucas's eyes when he looked up, full of sincerity and awkwardness. The feeling of torment gnawed at her, like a small thorn stuck in her heart. One evening, Lucas received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was hoarse. "Mr. Grant, I'm David, the former accountant at Grant Holdings. I have something you need to know." They met in a deserted bar. David looked haggard, but his eyes were clear. "Mr. Donnelly wasn't just manipulating shareholders," David whispered. "He's draining money from the fund through shell companies. I backed up all the files before I was fired." David pushed a USB drive across the table. "If you truly want to fight him, use this. But be careful, Mark won't leave you alone." Lucas gripped the USB drive tightly. He understood. This was the last chance not just to save himself, but to save the belief Kate had once placed in him. 3 weeks later, Lucas filed a lawsuit against Mark Donnelly for market manipulation and embezzlement. Mark sneered in the media, mocking, a bankrupt guy trying to reclaim the spotlight with a morality script. Pathetic. But this time, Lucas didn't respond. He just prepared. The trial began. The media crowded outside. Newspapers called it the final battle between ethics and power. Lucas, wearing a simple shirt, stood before the court. No bodyguards, no expensive lawyers. Only him and a few community center staff members accompanying him. On the other side, Mark appeared in a gray suit, confident and scornful. The financial evidence was presented. A few people in the gallery nodded when they saw the consistency in the numbers, but it still wasn't enough to convict Mark. Mark's lawyer's voice rang out, clear and deliberate. "Your Honor." "What, Mr. Grant presented are merely personal accounts, lacking authenticated witnesses. A story colored by regret." The air thickened. Lucas looked down, clutching his file. He had prepared for the worst. Then the courtroom door opened. A woman walked in. The murmuring began, then gradually faded. Kate. She wore a white shirt, her figure small, but her eyes resolute. When their eyes met, Lucas bowed his head slightly, a silent apology, simple and deeper than any defense. Kate walked to the witness stand. Her hand trembled slightly, but her voice rang out steady. "Your Honor, I am Kate Reyes. I am the server who was publicly humiliated and later invited by Mr. Lucas Grant to be a consultant for the fund." The entire room fell silent. Mark's lawyer began his attack. "Ms. Reyes, were you paid by Mr. Grant to help him rebuild his image?" Kate replied. Decisively, "No, I was not paid to lie. I was given respect, something money cannot buy." "Then why did you leave Mr. Grant recently? Because he betrayed you?" Kate was silent for a few seconds. She took a deep breath. "I left," she said, "because I believed the false evidence Mr. Donnelly provided. I believed Lucas Grant was using me. and I felt betrayed. The sound in the courtroom seemed to be sucked out. Lucas bowed his head. An elderly woman in the back row quietly wiped a tear. But then, Kate continued, her gaze fixed on Mark. I read the lawsuit documents. I saw what Mr. Donnelly did to the fund. I realized that even though Lucas Grant was once wrong, he learned how to fight for what is right. And Mr. Donnelly has never known remorse. Her voice was strong, echoing through the large room. A person who was wrong and chooses to make amends is more worthy of trust than someone who has never been honest. Murmurs erupted throughout the gallery. The judge, a grey-haired man who had been silent throughout, nodded slightly. Thank you, Ms. Reyes, he said. His voice choked. Your testimony is deeply appreciated. 2 tears silently fell in the back row. A female reporter put down her pen. Her eyes red. Following Kate's testimony, Lucas stood up to present the final evidence, the data provided by David, the secret transactions, forged signatures, internal transfers all clearly displayed on the large screen. Mark's lawyer tried to object, but it was too late. The judge hammered the gavel. Mark Donnelly, you are under arrest for fraud and market manipulation. The court is adjourned. The sound of cameras flashed continuously. Mark struggled and shouted, but the sound of handcuffs drowned everything out. Lucas did not smile. He just stood still. Turning to look at Kate, she looked back, her eyes wet, but no longer holding resentment. Outside the court, a light rain fell. Lucas walked out, his shirt soaked, standing in the rain, as if everything had just been washed clean. Across the street, Kate was waiting. She didn't approach immediately. Only when he took a step. Did she take a step? They stopped in front of each other. Thank you, Lucas said softly, his voice deep and trembling. For believing in someone who didn't deserve to be trusted, Kate shook her head, smiling, her voice soft but firm. Now you do. A gentle breeze blew past. Lucas bowed his head slightly, then looked up, his eyes warm like the dawn. On his hand, the old silver ring, his mother's only keepsake, gleamed in the rain. They stood there, needing no promises, nor affirmations, because in that look, the truth had been vindicated and trust had been reopened. Lucas slowly reached out, gently wiping away a raindrop still clinging to Kate's cheek. His fingers were rougher than before, calluses replacing the smoothness of the former billionaire's hand. That touch was an apology, needing no words, a perfect contrast to the moment he once stood still, letting Coca Cola stream down her face in arrogance and shame. Kate closed her eyes for a moment, not from pain, but sensing the tenderness and respect in the action. I looked for you everywhere, Lucas said, his voice deep and warm, trembling slightly in the cool air of the rain that was letting up. After that message, I thought I had lost everything, even the chance to make amends. Kate looked at him. In her eyes, there was no longer doubt, only a quiet peace. I was too afraid of betrayal, she replied, her voice soft but sure. But Mark taught me one thing. A liar will never fight for someone else's truth. You fought, Lucas, and that is the truth I needed. They stood under the courthouse awning, where the rain was slowly stopping. There were no romantic declarations, no lavish lights, only 2 people who had been hurt, learning to stand beside each other without pretending to be strong. 1 year later, Lucas declined all invitations to return to Grant Holdings. He used the remaining assets after being vindicated to establish a non-profit organization, the Respect at Work Fund, no longer a flashy media project, but a genuine organization, helping service workers who had been insulted to find their voices and their dignity. Kate managed the main training program. She focused on empowering women, the disadvantaged, and those who had been looked down upon. They worked in a small office, located on the 2nd floor of an old building, where the sound of traffic mixed with the tapping of keyboards, and the afternoon light streamed through the dusty window panes. No more reputation. No more stocks. Only two people once lost, now dedicating their lives to rebuilding trust for others. One spring day, they held a small, simple wedding that no one expected. The ceremony took place in an old church in suburban Brooklyn, where the bells had rung for 100 years. Kate wore a pure white lace dress, as simple as her own character. Emily, the server from before, was now the fund's training manager, standing beside her with a proud smile. Outside, the light rain fell, then gradually stopped, giving way to brilliant sunshine. The light streamed through the stained glass windows, reflecting onto the floor in small rainbow streaks. Lucas tightly held Kate's hand, his voice catching, "The day I threw Coke on you, I thought that was power. I thought I won. But it turns out, today is the day I truly win, when I stand beside you in this sincerity. When I get to build meaningful things with you, that is the greatest grace of my life." Kate looked at him, the corner of her lips trembling slightly. No one is born perfect, Lucas, but everyone deserves a second chance if they are brave enough to apologize and persistent enough to prove it. My forgiveness isn't about forgetting the pain, but about accepting the person you have become. They exchanged rings. Lucas's ring was not glittering diamond, but his mother's old silver ring, a symbol of healing. As they kissed, the church bells echoed throughout the space. Outside in the courtyard, the fund's trainees, workers, servers, women who had endured injustice, threw colored paper confetti into the air. The sunlight pierced through the lingering moisture, creating a brilliant halo around the couple. Kate leaned her head on Lucas's shoulder, looking out the window, where the last raindrops were evaporating under the sun. She said softly, "Like a narrative, some humiliation don't require revenge. They only need to be acknowledged and transformed into action. And some lost hearts only need a word of forgiveness to find their way back." Lucas squeezed her hand, smiling, the peaceful smile of someone who had found meaning in his own mistakes. The light slanted down, enveloping both of them. In that moment, the world no longer distinguished between winners and losers, only two people who dared to face the truth and learned to love from within their wounds. The story of Lucas and Kate did not end at the wedding, but began there when two people who were once adversaries learned to rebuild the world around them with respect. Lucas once thought power was strength, until he realized true strength is daring to bow your head and say sorry. And Kate, who was once humiliated in front of a crowd, realized that forgiveness is not weakness, but the strongest way to close the door on pain. Now, together, they help small workers find their voice, restoring value to kindness, something seemingly simple, yet the foundation of all change. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson life sends us. Lost people don't need to be perfect. They only need to be brave enough to admit they were wrong, and kind enough not to let others fall victim to the same mistake. If you have been hurt, remember, no one can take your dignity away, unless you choose to lay it down. If you have done wrong, dare to step back and say, sorry, not to be forgiven, but to learn how to become a better person. What about you? Are you willing to forgive someone who hurt you, or even yourself, for things you haven't had time to fix? Tell me your story, because who knows, your story might help someone out there restore their faith in humanity.